Good afternoon, everyone. You are welcome to this WimBoard Institute webinar on the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. I am Foluke Alakijaand, the chairperson of the WimBoard Institute Committee. Let me give you a brief on who and what we are. Women in Management, Business and Public Sector, WIMBIZ, is a non-profit organization that has, over the last 20 years, implemented programs that inspire, empower, and advocate for greater representation of women in leadership positions in the public and private sectors. WimBoard was launched in 2012 with the aim of increasing the representation of women on boards. The WimBoard Institute has been designed to provide diverse women in sub-Saharan Africa that want to take a seat or already have a seat on a board with world-class and cost-effective training. In partnership with IE Business School of Spain, WimBoard Institute offers a 3-month comprehensive board training, and we're planning on making this fully online due to COVID. We have some exciting training sessions lined up for the rest of the year, and the training calendar for 2021 has been posted on the WIMBIZ website. Our next training is on June 17th, and it is Finance 102, Finance for Non-Financial Directors. The facilitator is Mr. Tunde Lemo, former Deputy Governor, Operations, CBN, Chairman Flutterwave and Titan Trust Bank. It promises to be a phenomenal training, so do not miss out on participation. Today's session is about AfCFTA. We chose the topic because it is the biggest thing to happen to Africa in recent times. In a nutshell, it is the creation of a single market for goods and services in Africa. It means that Nigerian businesses now have direct access to markets in 54 African countries with 1.3 billion people. Isn't that a huge market? I'm pleased to introduce our facilitator, who is an AfCFTA champion. Francis Anatogu is a Senior Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on Public Sector Matters and Secretary to the Nigeria's National Action Committee on AfCFTA. In that role, he heads the secretariat that coordinates the AfCFTA readiness programs of government, ministries, and agencies and private sector stakeholders. He was also the secretary of the Presidential Committee on the Impact and Readiness Assessment of the AfCFTA and coordinated the advocacy, impact, and readiness assessment, decision analysis, and stakeholder engagements that resulted in Nigeria joining in the African Continental Free Trade Area. His expertise is in the area of policy formulation, implementation, strategic planning, organizational transformation, and public management. Francis joined the presidency from Deloitte, where he was the West Africa Energy and Natural Resources Consulting Lead. Prior to Deloitte, he worked in a similar role at Accenture. He started his career at Shell Group, working on energy and infrastructure projects around the world. Francis studied mechanical engineering at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and has an MBA from the George Business School, University of Cambridge. He's going to enlighten and engage us on the new opportunities, challenges, and threats that AfCFTA portends. So I'd encourage you to please listen attentively and let us have a great webinar. But before we bring on our facilitator, we're going to have some questions via poll. I'd like you, it's going to come up now, and I'd like you to please answer those questions so that we can get the results before Francis comes on. So it's very simple questions. Please answer them. And once we get the answers, Francis, we can talk about them in more details. Please continue. We're awaiting the results of the polls. Okay. Francis, do you want to go through the results?
Okay, yes, I can. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies. Let me quickly go through the results, and then we can get on with the topic of the day. So first one, I believe that the AfCFTA is likely to have a significant impact on small and medium scale businesses, and 82% said agree. Only 1% disagrees, and the rest, the 17%, are uncertain. The second question, there is a lot that still needs to be done to upgrade export services, export capacity and capabilities of Nigerian businesses. And 99% say it's true. The third question, am I fully aware or do I understand the trade rules affecting the industry sector that I operate in? And 19% says, yes, I understand thoroughly. 33% says, I have some knowledge. 43% says, I really do not know how much, I really do not know much about the trade rules. And 6% says, no idea at all. And this for me is the most interesting part. And hopefully we can talk about this, because really you can't get into export trade without understanding the rules in your sector at home and in your target market. So on this note, I can go quickly to the topic of the day. So once again, good afternoon, distinguished ladies. Thank you, Mrs. Alakijaand and team, for putting this together. I'm very, very, very pleased to be here, and it's indeed a great opportunity to connect with the women that the WIMBIZ women, the women that that are on board positions in various businesses in Nigeria, because the AfCFTA is actually key. It's transformative. It's going to change. It will change the operating landscape. Not overnight. It won't happen overnight, but the AfCFTA will guide how we trade over the next 10, 20 years and beyond. It is also important that we bear in mind that AfCFTA is just the starting point. The goal of the founding fathers, which was clearly stated in the Abuja Treaty of 1991, is to achieve customs union. So it's to achieve a trading, a community of nations. And it is clear from that treaty that they understand clearly that Africa can only project political power when we have economic power. So on this note, I would say welcome to this session on the AfCFTA. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So essentially, I've got an hour and a half with you. I would try and make it as interactive as possible, but essentially I will cover three key areas and then we interact, give you an overview of the AfCFTA, talk a bit about trading under AfCFTA, and then talk also about getting started on the AfCFTA. I think I jumped the gun. The moderator is here. Cecilia, are you here?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
No, I think you're doing well. So you didn't jump the gun.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So I think for the next 15 minutes, I'll provide an overview of the AfCFTA. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. So next slide, please. So what is AfCFTA? It's about a continental market for trade in made in Africa goods and services. And it provides, why do we need the AfCFTA? It provides a rule-based arrangement for trade. Rule-based so that you're able to control some of the predatory trade practices that have impact on the economy of nations. Practices like dumping, unfair subsidies, smuggling, and so on. Why do we need it? Africa today contributes about 2% to global trade, despite our population. Intra-Africa trade stands at about 15% of our total trade, compared to about 65%, 67% in Europe, Asia 58%, and North America 48%. And why is this important? Trade with your neighbors. Your neighbors are closest to you. You are linked to your economies. The more your economics are linked to your neighbors, the more trade that happens, the better the relationship, and the higher the growth in your economy, and the more your capacity to lift people out of poverty. So for us, AfCFTA is about lifting people out of poverty, growing the economy of African nations. By single market, what do we mean? What it means is that we are eliminating barriers to trade. And some of these barriers are tariff-based in the form of import duties, levies, and other charges. Others are non-tariff barriers, such as bureaucratic controls, regulations that tend to favor locals against foreigners, and so on. And why is this important for us in Africa and for us in Nigeria? And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. By having access to a big market, you have access to, with AfCFTA, you have access to a big market, and a market of about $3.5 trillion in GDP, a market of 1.3 billion people compared to 200 million that we have in Nigeria. Nigeria is big, no doubt, but Africa is much bigger. And it might interest you to know that the Nigeria's total export stands at about 50 billion per annum, compared to African export of over $500 billion per annum. So really, there's a lot that Nigeria is big, but Africa is much bigger. With AfCFTA, Africa becomes the largest economy in Africa, not Nigeria. So if you go to the next slide. So all I want to show with this slide is that this is not a journey that started today. This is a journey that started with the independence movement. It was at that time that our founding fathers realized that you need economic power to really be effective on the global stage. Nigeria has been leading the charge With the first Lagos Plan of Action, which was adopted in 1980, the Abuja Treaty that established the African Economic Community in 1991, and which was the treaty that established detailed AfCFTA and other initiatives to actualize part of what you now know as the AU Agenda 2063. Nigeria was at the forefront of negotiating the agreement until it was presented to the African heads of state in March 2018. And then it became operational after 22 countries ratified in May 2019. But we did not sign till July 2019. And the reason was that the stakeholders, Nigerian stakeholders, were worried that the AfCFTA could have some undesirable implications for us because of our economy, because of our import dependence, and because of the state of our infrastructure and all of that. And I'll tell you a bit more why AfCFTA is a must-do for Nigeria. Following the signing of the agreement in November 2020, we submitted our instrument of ratification, and the African heads of state in December 2020 agreed for trade under AfCFTA to commence. At this point, I would say that yes, officially trade has commenced, but with COVID, the negotiations in some areas are still going on. Negotiations on the schedules of tariff concessions and specific commitments for trade in goods and services are still being discussed. Negotiations on rules of origin are still ongoing. 86% of the tariff lines have been agreed, but you still have some areas that are outstanding. So it is still work in progress, but the political will is there. A lot is going on to get it realized. If you go to the next slide, just keep going. Right. I think the key thing that this slide is mentioning is that AfCFTA is about trading under preferential arrangements. So by removing the duty and removing and aligning regulations and removing barriers, we stand a chance to trade among ourselves and be as competitive, if not more competitive, than goods and services coming from outside Africa. A key point to note is that as at 2018-2019, 85% of our goods, of imported goods, come from outside Africa. So that is 85% of goods that we can domicile, that we can trade amongst ourselves. The other thing to note is that the AfCFTA will treat Africans and African products as if they are Nigerian products or any other country. So we are leveling the playing field for Africa and Africans. You go to the next slide. So there a lot of studies have been undertaken by various agencies, and these are some of the figures that you may have come across from the World Bank. I believe this the AfCFTA has the potential to lift about 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty and boost incomes of 68 million others. The AfCFTA will boost Africa's income by about 450 billion by 2035. It will increase Africa's export by about 560 billion. So pretty much doubling the current imports, mostly in manufacturing, it says. And for women specifically, it will spur larger wage gains for women than for men. It will boost wages for both skilled and unskilled workers. So let's see where some of these things will come from. Go to the next slide. Okay. Now, before we do that, let's see, what does this mean for Nigeria? And I mentioned earlier, why do we think AfCFTA is critical for Nigeria? And I use the word critical. And the first point is, you are in business, look at your business. We are an import-dependent economy. You import capital equipment and all of that. But over the past 10 years, your income as an individual, as a business in dollar terms, has been eroded by as much as 136% or as much as 192%, depending on if you're using the CBN rate or using the Bureau de Change figures. And that's not desirable. What we also see is that in the past 5 years, we have witnessed a recession, and each time, yes, the last one was as a result of COVID and it's global, but the one before that was as a result of the fall in oil price. And each time there's a fall in oil price, our economy suffers. So we need to break out of that cycle. And the only way to break out of that cycle is by exporting more of non-oil products. What we've seen with the recession and all of that is rising unemployment, which at a point was as high as 42% in 2018. And rising unemployment, rising population, and all of that is not sustainable. Something has to give. What we have is a revenue problem. So we need to grow the revenue. We need to export. We need to grow the local content of what we do. That is the only way that we can get out of this situation. Now, we all know about the global move away from fossil fuels, which means that we also, besides the immediate problems that we are having, we need to start preparing for a post-oil world. So, so really, AfCFTA is essentially the first step in a number of very major steps that we need to take as a country to grow the resilience of our economy, grow our economy and grow the resilience that we have within that economy. And the opportunities are there in Africa, if you can see from the slides. And if you look at, for instance, manufacturing, and let's take auto and auto parts, Africa imports, in spite of all the capacity that we know about that exists in South Africa, in Morocco, in Egypt, and other countries. Africa imports $36 billion of auto and auto parts per annum. Africa imports refined petroleum of about $36 billion. This is an area that we have a competitive advantage. Natural, we are endowed in that area. In agriculture, Africa imports 5.7 billion in oil palm, rubber 5.7 as well, rice 6.7 billion, and even sugar 6.9 billion. So in terms of agriculture, there is a lot that we can tap into. And then even when you get into services, transportation, travel services, travel and tourism, other business services, they are all huge. So really the opportunity is there, but we now need to take advantage of that opportunity. A key point to note here is that because we've depended so much on oil for the past 50 years, we have not been in the habit of negotiating preferential deals like many other countries, including our African countries, especially countries like Kenya, countries like South Africa, countries like Morocco and Egypt. So we have depended a lot on oil. So we're now in a stage of learning how to do the real business, the real sector. If you go to the next slide. So the opportunities are there at that macro level, are there in terms of what we import and displacing others to supply our products to others in Africa. Now, if you now try to bring it home, how is this an opportunity for me as a business owner, as an SME? It's about then supplying, producing to supply to Africa. Producing to supply to Africa means manufacturing. And by the way, most of what Africa imports are manufactured products. So indeed, we have opportunity to industrialize and supply products to Africa. And the production will need to be done by companies. For us, if you think about our SMEs that constitute maybe 85%, or I think it's even 90% of businesses, then you ask yourself, how do we make this happen? And a number of things will need to happen. So the way that we configure the implementation has to be such that SMEs will do the production, but they need to be aggregated. Scale is important to compete. So there's need to aggregate them. There's need to grow the ecosystem that they will work in. But is the opportunity there? Yes. What it also means is that people will have to specialize just so that they can be the best in what they do and drive costs down. I've talked about, it's about expanding to new markets. So you would need to, and I'll talk about it a bit more under getting started, you would need to then learn how to create relationships, get suppliers in Africa, get markets in Africa, and expand your products in Africa. And there are, obviously, there will be opportunities for innovation in products and services and so on. If you go to the next slide. So I've presented all the good news, but we all know that there are mountains to climb. Mountains in terms of production and productivity issues, given the size of our manufacturing sector and the nature of our businesses. The infrastructure constraints are there. The insecurity goes beyond access to farms to even being able to move goods and services freely on the trunk roads. And we, by the fact that we are the largest economy, we have been experiencing predatory trade practices, and these are goods from outside Africa coming into our neighboring countries and being smuggled into Nigeria. So that has been happening and continues to happen, and that is something that we have to deal with to succeed with AfCFTA. Access to funding is a constraint, and from my conversations, even access to foreign exchange is also a constraint. What we have also found in the past 1 year is that literally every sector will require some form of regulatory update in terms of policy update or updating laws to for us to attract the investments that we need, for them to feel free to make the investments and take advantage of the opportunities that AfCFTA bring. If you go to the next slide, but it's not all gloom because we've got some things that set us apart from the competition. One is we, in spite of all the challenges that we talk about, a lot is happening, but they are happening at informal level. They are happening at small scale level, and the opportunity is to grow the scale, and formalize the businesses. We are naturally endowed, both in terms of agriculture and natural resources. We have a domestic market that we need to catalyze to be able to really produce and then sell to the rest of Africa. And even as we talk about the issues, if you go to the next slide, even as we're here talking about it, companies are already taking advantage of the opportunities that we have in Africa. These are just examples of companies. These examples obviously does not include Nollywood, which has been in Africa, our music industry, and our musicians who are already developing collaborations and relationships and partnerships of all sorts across Africa. So, and of course, the new kid on the block, our fintech industry, one of the most vibrant in Africa, already taking steps growing into Africa. So really, a lot opportunities are there. A lot needs to be done, but people are taking advantage of the opportunities in spite of the challenges. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this is where this is where the overview stops. The next is going to the trading under AfCFTA, but I think perhaps I could stop here and we can have one or two interact for the next 10-15 minutes, answer one or two questions before we now get into the next section. Cecilia, is that okay? Is Cecilia around?
I just got reconnected.
Okay. So I don't know if there are any questions, one or two questions we can take before we move on to the details of trading under AfCFTA and what that. If not, I can move on. Okay.
There are questions in the question box. Perhaps you would like to take one or two of them.
Okay.
Francis.
All right, that's fine. So I think there's a question from Yetunde Oyeneyin. There seems to be a lot of focus on the export capabilities of Nigeria. How does this play out, since we know that many African countries, not necessarily in the SSA, have more advanced manufacturing capabilities, so they are also getting up to play in the AfCFTA space? How are we going to ensure that Nigeria will be able to compete in the bigger marketplace? Okay, this is a great question. So yes, indeed, the focus is on export. The focus is on export to grow, like I said earlier, the resilience in our economy. Yes, what we found when we did the impact and readiness assessment is that there is no African country that is self-sufficient in any product. You've got capacity in some areas, but it's not. But you can't do it on your own. That's number one. The second thing is that various countries have are competitive in various areas. So you can grow your capabilities on all products across all the value chains. You need to be deliberate. You need to be specific in areas where you focus on. And it's about an ecosystem. And that also applies when you think about AfCFTA. If you talk about, for instance, if you are a food manufacturer in Nigeria, and you get your, for instance, palm oil or whatever from Ivory Coast, right? You get, if it is cheaper in Ivory Coast, you bring it from Ivory Coast. If it's cheaper in Ghana, you bring it from Ghana. Or like what we have done as part of the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, we get the phosphate and others from Morocco, and we blend the fertilizer here in Nigeria. That is really what it is. But the important thing is that you are trading externally, because at at a business level, you are hedging against foreign exchange risk. And as a nation, you are also hedging against the fall in oil price, which is the mainstay of our economy. So essentially, we have to, it is a necessity that we must do. The second question says, how can Adetunji Omotola says, how can Nigerian businesses compete with nations such as South Africa, given the challenges we have in manufacturing, given the low level of electricity generation, a high cost of diesel on one hand, and on the other hand, which non-oil goods, especially, do we have competitive advantage in, and how can we facilitate the export of same in the massive SADC market of 300 people? Okay, in my slide, towards the end of this, I will show you products where Nigeria export over $10 million of products per annum. I'll also show you some of those products that are in high demand in Africa that we need to target. So these are potential products for us. The question about low level of electricity, high cost of diesel, these are issues of competitiveness. These are issues that we have to deal with. These are issues that are being worked on, but it's something that we need to keep at. And I can tell you that in the lifespan of this trade agreement versus the issues that we're talking about, companies are gradually finding solutions to some of these things, not the best way, but they are finding solutions to them. But in addition, there has been a lot of emphasis on infrastructure. A lot needs to be done. I'm not trying to belittle the challenge there is. A lot needs to be done. Government still needs to focus on infrastructure, but we also now need to be innovative in terms of thinking about the incentives that we need to provide to our businesses for them to be competitive and for them to take their products to Africa. I think perhaps one more question. So there's challenges of power and security and policy somersault. Okay, so there's a question from me, Wilder Halim. Given challenges of power, security, and policy somersault, how do we think realistically that Nigeria can compete even against a neighbor like Ghana? Okay, so earlier this morning, I was in a meeting with an automobile manufacturer, and the issue of policy somersault came up. And what is clear from the conversation is that some of the policies, or in fact, all the policies that we come up as government would need to have some legislative backing. So, and this is an area that that we need to push. But in fact, this is an area. In my opinion, this is a new area. I say a new area because this is an area where the private sector are the people that bear the brunt of this of the fallout of this policy will need to actually take ownership of in driving government to make sure that some of these policies get to the National Assembly and get passed. It's the government will push, but really there's a need for people, associations, business groups, and so on, to push to make sure that these things happen. It needs to be a joint effort. It has to be a joint effort because the gains are ours, the losses are also ours, and it affects the private sector even greater. And yes, the government it affects, but really the first set of people, the people that bear the brunt of this is the private sector. And from my interactions, this is an area that needs a lot of improvement from the private sector. And this is something that I think at the board level, at industry association level, we need to keep pushing until we get the policies that we need to be successful. I think at this stage, I can go to the next section of my presentation. So now, if you go back one step, or one more. So this is about what does it take to trade under AfCFTA. So if you go forward now. So if you recall, I mentioned earlier that the benefit of AfCFTA is that you have preferential arrangement with African countries. So under AfCFTA, the ambition is to eliminate duties, tariffs, and charges and levies on 90% of tariff lines. So every product has a tariff line. It belongs to a line, a tariff line. And altogether, there are about 6,000 plus tariff lines. So 90% of them will get to zero import duty. In some countries over a 5-year period, in other countries over a 10-year period. For us in ECOWAS, it's over a 10-year period. But there is a 7% of tariff lines which we call the sensitive list. And in this list, they are offered some protection and they will be liberalized over a longer period, 13 years period. And the remaining 3% in the exclusive list are those tariff lines that will not be subject to duty elimination. So, and this, both the 7% and both the 7% and the 3% are designed to protect infant industries, protect strategic industries for countries before we get into the liberalization space. So essentially, you will need to know where your products fall. At this stage, at ECOWAS level, we have agreed those products that will be under the 90% list. This list is currently at the African Union level undergoing technical verification to make sure that certain guidelines are met before the list becomes public. If you go to the next, so the other part and a critical element to be aware of is the rules of origin. The rules of origin is like, is what determines whether, yes, a product can be selected and say it has been liberalized, but it do not get automatic benefit. It is only, you only get the benefit if the rule of origin is met. Now, another key thing to note about AfCFTA is that unlike ECOWAS, which has a general rules of origin, so value addition of about 40% or thereabout, in AfCFTA, you have product-specific rules of origin. So the tariff lines that I mentioned earlier are all subject to specific rules of origin. So if your goods satisfy the rules of origin and it is in the liberalization list, then yes. Otherwise, you will still be subject to the normal import-export process. Now, when you talk about rules of origin, essentially what it says is, where is this good coming from? Is it made in Nigeria? It determines So for us in Nigeria, the rule of origin is what determines what we can call made in Nigeria product. And there are two broad criteria for determining rules of origin. One, it is wholly obtained, that is 100% made in Nigeria in our case, or the product has undergone significant transformation. So if we look at it in, let's go to the next slide. So look at these are examples of goods that are wholly obtained. Live animals, obviously, if they're in Nigeria, if they are born in Nigeria, they are made in Nigeria. Vegetables, mineral products, not the refined product, but the natural resources, so mineral oils and so on. Fisheries, plant products, and even waste, scrap resulting from manufacturing operations are all classified as wholly obtained in the country of origin. Go to the next slide, please. This deck is I've made it available to the WIMBIZ Secretariat, so you will have access to this slide. Now, when you talk about substantial transformation, there are four key elements. One is change in tariff classification. So when a product that you have is classified under, say, tariff line 11.01, for instance, but after the value addition, after processing, it now moves into tariff line 22. There has been sufficient change. In some cases, you have change in sub tariff heading. In some cases, what you measure is the value of non-originating materials, so the value of imported materials, to make sure that it is at a maximum before you can say this good is originating. And then manufactured or processing operations criterion is again another criteria for determining rules of origin. Now, and I'll give you a couple of examples of these rules of origin. If you go to the next slide. So let's take an example of diamond. The diamond is under the harmonized HS, we call HS code, the harmonized system classification code. A diamond is under 71.02, and gold is 71.08. But by combining diamond and gold and getting it jewelry, then you notice that the code has changed. So some transformation has happened. In this case, is a subheading, a change in subheading. Everything here is under heading 71, but there has been a change in subheading. So if for jewelry, the rule of origin is subheading, change in subheading, then this jewelry automatically qualifies for duty exemption. If you go to the next case, the next slide. The next one is tariff heading. So we look at wood, right? Cut wood. The HS code for that is 44.03, sorry. When the wood is sawn and planed, it changes, the tariff code changes to 44.07. So if the rule is change of subheading, you met the origin criteria. However, if the rule is change in tariff heading, then look on your right and you see furniture table. Notice that the tariff code is 94.03. So by changing wood to furniture, you have moved it from 44.03 or 44.07 to 94.03. So if the rule is changed in tariff heading, you have met the origin criterion. Go to the next slide, please. Let's look at processing operation. So if you look at processing operation here, let's look at just beer manufacturing. And this is just a simple example. So what are the inputs? You use water under 22.01 code, malt under 11.07 code, production hops and sugar syrup 2.7 and 17.02. And all these, by the time it comes to beer, it is 22.03. So this, depending on the product, this is what can be used to calculate whether it has met the rule of origin criterion. Go to the next slide. Now, in the next two slides, what I will just show you is how then do we, who checks that the rule of origin is met. Now, under the agreement, every country, every state party will have a designated competent authority. It is the role of that competent authority to ensure that rules, the AfCFTA rules of origin are complied with. It is every country would then have to assess the businesses and the products in their country and confirm by issuing a certificate of compliance that the product in question satisfies the rules of origin criteria. So essentially, how will this then work? If you go to the next slide. So under AfCFTA, and this is a process that we are working on and we will roll out as soon as we get some approvals. Under AfCFTA, every approved exporter will have an AfCFTA number. And as part of that AfCFTA number, we'll have, for the product associated with that company, you will have a product certificate of origin compliance. What that means is that before you are able to export, the designated competent authority will have to assess your product. It will be similar to the NAFDAC number process, really. You assess your product based on the criterion and that I explained earlier to say, does this good qualify or not? And once that qualifies, you get that certificate. It's a one-off qualification. And then for every product that goes out, the manufacturer will attach that certificate, or would provide that certificate to the exporter, and that exporter will provide it to the importer, who would then provide that certificate to the customs of the importing country to grant the necessary waivers. Now, besides the certificate of compliance to rules of origin, there is the normal certificate of origin that accompany every good, every consignment or every container or whatever that you export. The AfCFTA process does not change that. What it does change is, on the same form, there are some entries that pretty much customizes it to say this is an AfCFTA certificate, shipment certificate of origin. But anybody that is familiar with export, import, and export, that is familiar with certificate of origin, will understand and will see that there is really no change. The change happens at the back end, happens at the NACIMA end. For Nigeria, NACIMA is the delegated authority for issuance of certificate of origin. And the plan, if approved, is that we will continue that same, the NASMA will retain the same role under AfCFTA. Go to the next slide. I think this is where I stop in terms of the two key rules that will affect AfCFTA. The other point to mention under AfCFTA, which I've not covered here, is the need to satisfy the importing countries' import requirements. Now, some of these import requirements are in the areas of quality. There might be in the areas of additional documentation and so on. Packaging, for instance, if you now have to export to Egypt, the packaging must have a Arabic label. If you're going to Angola, it would have Portuguese on it. If you're going to Ivory Coast, you will have French among that. So now businesses that want to export will make sure that they comply to these import requirements. And it's important to stress this because over the past couple of years, we have witnessed a lot of rejects. And the rejects happen because the products in question are not accompanied by relevant documentation or do not meet the import requirements of the importing or destination country. But under AfCFTA, the plan is to harmonize regulations. The plan is to harmonize standards. So when this is working well, the NAFDAC standards or the Nigerian standards will mirror the standards that you have in other countries, such that when you satisfy the standards in the originating country, you are sure that you have met the standards of the destination country. I've talked a lot about trade in goods. There is trade in services under AfCFTA as well. And really, for trade in services, it is the regulation that drives trade in services. And the plan under AfCFTA is to harmonize regulations such that services can flow freely across borders. In terms of where we are on trade in services under AfCFTA, the protocol for trade in services is part of the phase 1 agreement that has been signed. However, the specific commitments of countries under trade in services, which says what we are liberalizing, is still being negotiated. It's important to also mention that in the first phase, there are 5 sectors that are being liberalized under AfCFTA: the financial services sector, the transportation sector, travel and tourism, communication sector, and business services. If you go to the next slide, please. I think before I get into this, under the next slide, and I'd like to make it interactive, or maybe I should just take this slide as well, and then we'll move on. And they say, how do you get started? What do you need to do? Which products, which services? Who do I talk to? And all of that. And I think these are basic questions, really fundamental questions for those that are not already there. And how do I meet all these rules of origin, documentation, and processes, and all of that? I guess the very first thing is to understand where are the opportunities. And in the next couple of slides, and I'll show them in a moment, what we did was to look at what are those products where Nigeria, where we already exporting. Where are which are the products that have high demand in Africa, and I'll show them in a second. But as a business, the fact that you understand where you are, you understand where you play in terms of products, but then you now need to say, can I export that product to Africa, or do I export something else to Africa? The other thing to think about is to say, okay, if you understand this is a broad product, this is the market of interest, which segment of the value chain? And this is quite important because when, as part of the studies that we're doing at the National Action Committee, we looked at cocoa, and we found that if you concentrate on raw cocoa and immediate derivatives of cocoa, you are looking at a market of about 300. For Nigeria, you're looking at a market of about $300 to $400 million. But if you look at the entire value chain of cocoa, right, and the cocoa products to chocolates to beverages and what have you, you immediately find that the market is about 3 billion to 4 billion. What we also found is that not all the segments of the value chain require the huge investment. So yes, you may not be competing, you may not have the muscle of Nestle or Cadbury, but there are areas, there are niche areas where SMEs or small and medium companies can play. So this is, in our view, the very first step in deciding to play in AfCFTA. Then it is important to assess the market where you want to play. I talked a lot about the import requirements. You need to assess the assess the competition. You need to assess the regulations and the import requirements. You need to then look at how you would meet you need to look at your value, your supply chain, if you will, from suppliers, and you need to identify customers and how and make sure that you can relate to them or relate with them profitably. The laws and regulations, you need to look at them as well, because again, especially for trade in services, that can limit what you can do, and that can also limit the kind of recourse or remedies that you can get in other countries. With this done, then you now need to look at your business. Obviously, supplying from Kaduna to Lagos is a different ballgame from supplying from Lagos to Algiers. So really, your business model would need to reflect the new the target business that you have. Now, we've talked about labeling, but also what about the size of the products that you're sending to the target to the target country? How do you do it? Are you going to establish a business or a subsidiary in your target market? Are you going to work with suppliers over there? How exactly are you going to do it? So you need to now think about your partnerships and how do you start? And this for me then brings, I must emphasize this, because now with AfCFTA, our chambers of commerce, organizations like WIMBIZ and Co would now need to be a lot more active in terms of connecting businesses, which is their core mandate. So because you can't do it alone, it needs to be coordinated in some form to reduce cost of customer acquisition and so on. We need to be part of trade shows and so on, but essentially these are all the things that need to happen for us to say we have started taking advantage of the AfCFTA. If you go to and when you have all this figured out, you probably, and then you start to execute, try to secure your first order and you get on with it. But it's also important to mention that with e-commerce these days, you might be able to leapfrog some of the challenges and cut through some of these steps, because with e-commerce platforms, you are able to position your products or market your products directly to consumers in other countries, be them via platforms like Jumia, or Konga, or even Amazon. You are able to do that. So really, these are things to, or even Instagram in these days. So really, these are ways to get into the market. If you go to the next slide, I've listed some of the government agencies that are doing a lot that would be of help when you're thinking of export. The first one would be NEPC. And oh my God, yeah, it's here. We have it on number 7. NEPC is very important, especially for small, medium scale enterprises. One, because it is their mandate to drive export. They are doing a lot in terms of capacity building. They are doing a lot in terms of trade promotions. So really, if you're not in touch with NEPC, my one key takeaway would be after this program would be get in touch with NEPC, understand what they're doing, and see where you plug in. Especially for women, there's a She Trade program that has been running for a number of years, and we recorded some very exciting milestones and women exporting not to Africa but to the world. So again, get in touch with NEPC. If you need our help, we'll direct you to contact within NEPC. The other one I've talked about, Nasima, from the perspective of matchmaking businesses. Then if you are in food and agricultural sector, you can't ignore NAFDAC, you can't ignore Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service. Or if you are into animal, Department of Veterinary and Pest and Control Services under the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, your industry associations are important, MAN, NANS, NASMIs, and so on, because you now need to band together, you need to pull together to review, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of knowledge about what the issues are and what the solutions are that reside within the private sector that do not speculate into the policymaking space. This needs to happen more and more. And the private sector, again, needs to drive the process. And lastly is the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. They negotiate the agreement, they negotiate what goes into the sensitive list, exclusive list, and all of that. It's not them to decide what, but they negotiate, they coordinate the negotiation. So again, that's an office to stay close to. And of course, us at number 1, National Action Committee on AfCFTA, our role is to coordinate the implementation, work with organizations like WIMBIZ, like MAN, and the MDAs at the federal level, but also at the state level to create awareness on the AfCFTA and highlight the opportunities and drive some of the interventions that are required to resolve some of the challenges that we highlighted earlier. If you go to the next slide, what I'll do in the next couple of slides is just to show you some of the statistics of the products and services that may be of interest, that is of interest in Africa, that may be of interest to you. So if you go to the next slide, the way we have arranged them in 2 buckets. So our arrowheads and high potential. And we said that arrowhead products are those products, products that we're already exporting and we can then strive to build, to scale up build the capacity and push into Africa. And the threshold we put there is products that we're already exporting formally in excess of $10 million per annum. And high potential are those products and services in which where we don't have competitive advantage, but Africa demands and imports over $1 billion of such products per annum. Obviously, if you import $1 billion per annum, we'll go and find the competitive advantage and build it. It's as simple as that. So if you go to the next slide. So this is in a snapshot. Look at Nigeria's export and what Africa demands in these products that we're talking about. Our export is $2.66 billion and Africa demands 236. So our market share is 1.13%. In services, 6.6 billion, and Africa demand is in about 180 billion. So if you go to the next slide, so we can see some of the products. So in the manufacturing sector, you have products like articles of base metal, tobacco, fertilizer, salt, sulfur, plastering materials, cereal, flour, starch, milk, edible preparations, beverages, spirits and vinegar, dairy produce, soap. But if you look at them, in a number of them, we deal in millions, Africa deals in billions. You will have this slide, so I'll just go quickly. Go to the next slide. So, and these are areas where we don't do a lot. Glass and glassware, 8.9 million. And Africa demands imports 3.7 billion. Aluminium, we just we export 4.9 million, Africa imports 4.4 billion. Iron and steel, when you look at iron and steel, you say, okay, iron and steel at Jakarta. No, there are various, you can break down into various subcategories, and in some of the companies in Nigeria producing products that can go to Africa. Edible fruits, some rubber is another key one. Go to the next slide, please. Very quickly, please.
Is it just me or is Francis frozen?
I guess it's frozen. Let me check.
Okay. Bear with us, please. Francis, you're muted.
Okay, sorry.
Great, you're back.
I don't know when it cut me off. Okay, so if you go back one slide, let's see. I think
you talked about edible fruits and then iron. You were going to talk about, oh no, edible fruits. Edible fruits, thank you.
So I talked about rubber. I don't know if you heard me talk about rubber and glass and glassware. All right, I was going to talk about rubber. So rubber, if you look at rubber, we used to have our rubber plantations, we know. And now our export is just 1.4 million, while Africa demands 4.2 billion. Now, if you look at these things these products in isolation, okay, we can talk about them and export. But then let's just take a linkage approach. And if you think of rubber, aluminum, iron and steel, glass and glassware, these are all inputs to the auto industry. So if we build the capacity to export these things, we also at the same time build the capacity or build the local content of locally manufactured automobiles. So the linkages are there. I can't find leather here, but it is somewhere. So one is, even as we're building the capacity to export, we are also building increasing our local content, a lot of backward integration. So it's important to know that as well. If you go to the next slide. Right. So again, look at good old coffee, tea, and spices, vegetable food, cocoa I mentioned earlier, sugar, oil palm. See, and oil palm is another very, very interesting story. We don't in Africa have the capacity to supply what Africa needs. All African countries put together do not have that capacity. So this is an area that requires us to build capacity in. Soya is there, rubber is, leather is there. Okay, so go to the next slide. Okay, so these, I thought I've talked about this. These are, I've talked about this. These are agriculture, right? But go forward. I think there's something wrong here. So I've talked about, so under agriculture, so these are some of the products that are of interest to us. Go to the next slide. So in terms of services, again, so you've got travel, you've got sea transportation, you've got financial services, telecommunication services. Insurance, for me, insurance is a key one. Just look at insurance, direct insurance. 220 million. Africa imports 7.1 billion of insurance products. That, for me, stands out and a clear one to target. Freight by sea, 190 million versus 26.8 billion. Again, so there's a scope for Nigerian acquisition of Nigerian vessels and transporting goods across Africa using Nigeria. In fact, of course, Nigeria, it could be African, but preferably Nigerian vessels, of the vessels themselves, but Nigerian crew as well. Now look at air transport, and look at passenger transport, all modes. So really, if you go to the next slide, I think I've come to the end of it. Really, the scope is wide. The opportunities are immense. The challenges are also immense, but really, if you think about the imperatives I mentioned earlier, the imperative that we need to create jobs, we need to, planning for a post-oil world is a survival plan. It's something that we must do. So AfCFTA and export is not a nice to do. It is a core requirement for us as a license to exist for us as a nation. And this is really the end of my presentation. I think we can have a general interaction now. We can answer questions, but also over to you, Cecilia, now.
Thank you very much, Francis. I mean, you have made a subject that for everyone has been a complex subject, and one that everyone gets nervous once they hear AfCFTA. You have actually simplified it for everyone, and thank you very much for doing that. And the slides on the products, the supply and the potential demand, thank you very much for that. So we have a few questions, and we can absolutely do more So one of the questions, I'll start with one of the easy ones. I may not have the names of each person, but we had a question on why the differentiated timeline for elimination of tariffs for the ECOWAS region, because ECOWAS has 10 years compared to the other regions and compared to some of the countries. And then there was a question about how are we getting information to small enterprises that actually will be impacted, but because they are small, they probably, the information isn't being distilled down to that level. So what are we doing to make sure that we're covering all companies? Then there was a very good question. I mean, all the questions are good, but there was an interesting question about intellectual property and the territoriality of intellectual property, the fact that your protection is territorial. So now with AfCFTA, how does that, I mean, what changes are being made to cover this issue of territoriality? Is it going to be covering the whole continent? So maybe if you could respond to those, and then we would have the next set of questions. And in the meantime, I'd like to encourage participants. We have close to 200 participants, and I'd like to encourage participants to please send their questions. This is our Q&A session. So let's get as much information as we can get out of Francis during this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we over the past 1 year, we've been holding webinars, and because of COVID, we had elaborate plans to tour the country and all of that, but because of COVID, we had to do a lot via virtual means. But since then, we've also started a nationwide sensitization program at every state level. So again, because of COVID, what we tend to do is sensitize the associations within the states to then sensitize their people. But the second point to note is that with some of the core informations that they need still being negotiated. So at this moment is a lot of passing information on what this is about and so on. So the message is going down, it's trickling down, but I know a lot still needs to be done. We will intensify, like I mentioned, especially like I talked about the rules of origin, the designated competent authority. The plan is to get that approved. Once we have that and we have very concrete information, and you're telling somebody, if you are to export, you must get registered. It's specific information. You're in a position to say, these are what these are the products that will qualify, and then you need to go through the registration process. So as you communicate, you are getting response and you're getting people take action in terms of AfCFTA. But beyond that as well, once we have the approvals, we also plan to sensitize people through television, advertisement, jingles, and all of that. But again, at the moment, we're going through states, and at some point, we will now get right down to the grassroots. In terms of the intellectual property, that's a great question. So The slide that I do not have, unfortunately, is the slide that shows the AfCFTA, how we are negotiating the AfCFTA. So in the phase one, we have looked at the trade in goods, trade in services, and we have established a dispute settlement mechanism. In the phase two, which just kicked off, we will be negotiating the intellectual property rights, the competition policy, and investment policy. So the intellectual property right is a major one, but the negotiation on that has not. It's just about taking off. It's just really we're at the terms of reference stage. I hope this answers the question. So until then, we will have to rely on existing laws, but really it is critical, especially for trade in services across African countries. And
Thank
someone,
you.
yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Go ahead.
Please go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for those responses. There was a question about how do we deal with products that the raw materials are imported into Nigeria and then production takes place in Nigeria. How is that going to be treated under AfCFTA? And then we talked about somersault of government policies. How are we also dealing with overlaps in government policies, just muddying the waters with exporters not knowing who really is the relevant authority? So the person who asked the question raised policy overlaps, for example, between CBN and customs. But how are we dealing with those types of issues?
Okay, that's fine. So the first question about raw materials imported and processed in Nigeria. So it depends on one, the product, which then determines the rule of origin that will apply. So the rule of origin that will apply will then determine the threshold that of in-country local content or or value addition that you must meet to satisfy AfCFTA rules of origin. However, if you import the raw material from an African country, it counts as made in Nigeria. So this is part of the incentive for us to trade together. That is the answer to the raw material. So it depends on the extent of the value. It depends on the product. It depends on the extent of the value addition. It depends on the source of your raw materials. If Africa, it will count as local content. If it is from outside Africa, it will not. In terms of overlap in policies, I think it's this is something that will evolve, that we will work through as trade becomes more and more. You know, again, this is a personal view, but I think for so long we have been driven by oil. So a lot of things we've not paid very close attention to. So some of the issues that we're now looking at are arising because of the issues that we're having related to trade. So, my expectation is that with more focus on non-oil, with more revenue coming from non-oil, these problems will surface, but over time they will be resolved and the agencies will evolve to have I'm trying to choose my words carefully. The agencies will find ways to collaborate and work together to achieve the same purpose. So are you there, Cecilia?
Yes, I am. I was just unmuting.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. So now there's some interesting questions regarding gender. So the AfCFTA agreement is actually one of the few agreements that actually talks about gender and puts that as one of the considerations that we'll be taking, that one of the considerations in implementing the agreement. So what are we doing in Nigeria regarding women? And well, I know you're having this conversation with us, and that's one major pointer. But what are other things that are being done to actually help women or facilitate their participation in this great market opportunity? Also, our competitiveness, and this is something that you have also mentioned, our competitiveness is highly dependent on the ease of doing business internally. So how are we facilitating our decision makers to deal with the areas of gridlock that actually impede competitivity? That word always gives me problems. So what are we doing about that major issue? Because the people may be ready, the market is ready, but we absolutely need to get through our own local systems. There's also a question regarding your availability, or personally, or your committee, your availability to engage with different associations and even some of the multinational companies. And I know you had a fantastic conversation with my former colleagues at First Bank, but I believe there's a similar there's a similar type conversation that other industries are looking to have. From the questions, it looks like there's a major interest from the pharmaceutical industry. And then there are questions also related to preservation of local content for natural products. If you could also say a few words on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just writing it down. Okay, so I think the first question is on gender. I think the first point there is, if you look at it at the informal level across countries, not just Nigeria, the women are very, very active in cross-border trade. They're not formalized, but they're very, very active. So if you're really serious about formalizing the informal trade, if you're really serious about increasing, bringing people out of poverty, then you can't ignore the women. But that said, it's not easy. But the point is that our approach, which we had, one of the questions that we had, and we had a study to chart a path, is how do we aggregate our SMEs to to produce what a bigger off-taker needs, so that you can, on one hand, formalize them. On the other hand, you can reduce the burden of documentation in terms of rules of origin and what have you, and pretty much improve scale. So that study has been concluded. The next step for us is to engage stakeholders to say, you know, are we really on the right path? And then have an agreed series of actions to be able to then implement that. That implementation, and it's not new. What we are talking about is similar to what the beer companies have done with SMEs and the sorghum growers. In the rice, we've got an agro scheme that happens with rice. So this is like, how then do we roll this out across other sectors and so on. In terms of, I know I've digressed a bit from women, but I talked about that in the context of SMEs. So one of the things that to do for us is an event with women, to actually listen to women as part of our planning, and try to factor and try to tweak what we have developed to ensure that the considerations of the women gender, the female gender, is captured into the implementation plan. So that is the extent where we are. We have the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs and the Steering Committee of the National Action Committee. So one of the actions that came out of the last meeting was to engage, and we will work with her to ensure that we have that event that brings women together, and then we can move that forward. One was women, the other youth, and then the third one was even getting the organized labor to have their own perspective, because at the end of the day, the people are human beings that will do the work. So those are the considerations, those are the things that we are looking at. On the competitiveness, so we need to figure out, and that's part of what I don't have an answer to that. But if you look at various countries as they were developing, industrializing, they provided some support to key sectors, key product areas, to catalyze to catalyze the sector in itself, but also to build the linkages, the ecosystem. And a key one that is quite interesting is the auto sector. Because if you look at the auto sector, for instance, when you're looking at Dhaka, you're looking at the plastic industry, you're looking at the rubber industry, you're looking at the glass industry, you're looking at electrical, electronics, name it. So it's about that where we can focus our attention on, and then it will build the rest. But there has to be some sort of incentives for that to compensate for the difficult operating environment. Do I have an answer to that right now? No, but it's something that we are thinking about. But one of the interesting things that I've come across in the past couple of weeks, and even last week, I asked one of the producer about power. I said, yeah, we know power is something that we know, access to power, we have power, it's just expensive. We have sorted out ourselves in terms of power provision, because we don't know when it will be solved, but anything to bring down the cost, then we are ready to listen. So why this example is that in spite of this, essentially to encourage everybody here to say, we must continue to find the solutions to the problems that exist. The ports, again, The ease of doing business project is handled by the vice president, is chaired by the vice president, and I know a lot of work is going on there day in, day out. So that tells you the magnitude of the challenges that we face in that area. It's not as easy as just giving an order and things would happen. The other point I'll mention is that, again, in the course of this work, what we have found what we found is that in comparison with our import process and our export process is actually, in fact, our import process is an expressway and our export process is a dirt road. So there's a lot that we need to do to actually patch the export route, to even bring it to the level of the import process, which we are still complaining about, but at least bring it to that level. And it will take time. The comforting news is that more and more people are getting interested. So with the interest and increase in the value of goods, then it's becoming attractive and it's beginning to get the attention that it deserves. So on competitiveness, again, the last point on competitiveness, and it goes to incentive, is catalyze demand, local demand. We've got the local market. Again, let's use cars, for example. We are using less than 10% of the capacity, installed capacity of the car assembly. So how do we catalyze demand for locally produced cars? How do we make it more attractive for people to buy brand new locally assembled cars instead of importing Tokumbo cars, if you will? So again, all these are things that we're thinking through, and we will propose some positions to the steering committee, our steering committee, and hopefully we can drive it all the way to the Federal Executive Council or the president directly. So the last question in terms of availability to engage, we have been engaging and we are open to engaging. Really, engaging is what is for us. If we can, my role as I see it is to catalyze the 200 million Nigerians. I can't do the work alone. My team can't do it alone. So if the more we catalyze people to even advocate, take action, one action or the other, they are more likely that we will succeed. So yes, I'm happy to work on that. We're working with the Manufacturers Association and other associations at the national level, and we are working with them as we go to the states. We have them all represented in our conversations and sensitizations. There is that gap in terms of businesses that are not part of any of this. I mean, a number of businesses don't have time for these organizations, so we still need to find ways to sensitize them. But it is work in progress, and we are willing to engage. And preservation of local content for natural products. I think I might need a bit more context to this.
I'll get the full question and I'll share it with you. But in the meantime, there's some other questions. Some of them are deeper dives into certain sectors. So pharmaceutical products, if you could talk about how pharmaceutical companies can benefit from AfCFTA, particularly as most of them import their raw materials from Europe and Asia. So that's one of the questions. Also, there's the ICT sector. If you could talk about specific opportunities for services industry, especially the ICT sector. And then there's like the clothes and personal products manufacturing sector. How that didn't appear to have been mentioned in the list of potential and arrowhead sectors. So if you could say, I mean, just say a few words on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think if you, starting with the farmer, so again, one realization is that we need to put we talk about security of food supply, we talk about security of energy supply, and COVID has told us now that we need to talk about security of well-being.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, the farmer is core, not discretionary. That's number one. But if you, secondly, the pharmaceutical medicaments is a top 20. It's one of those products that attract over $1 billion of imports into Africa from the rest of the world. So it is a high potential product for us. Now, last year we had, as part of putting together our implementation plan, we had a strategy workshop, and we had a pharmaceutical section of MAN. We spoke to them and a couple of other people, and we got a couple of ideas, but we also got a couple of ideas from NAFDAC and others. And I'm not in that space, but at least I picked up two things: that we need to help develop the API industry in Nigeria. So this is something that, yeah, we're willing to talk about. We're willing to see how do we drive this forward. What do we need to do as government, and what do we need the private sector to do to make this happen? It's a partnership. A lot of times it's like thrown over the fence. Government do this, but really in the new arrangement, it has to be a partnership, and everyone has to chip in. So I'm willing to engage some more to see, and we will issue the draft implementation plan as soon as we get the approval to do that. And it is really a work in progress plan for people to make inputs to, and we'll have version 1, we'll have a version 2, and we keep working on that. But pharma is a core area. ICT is both an enabler as it is a service area. Now, everything that we're talking about, if you just put E under it, then you have a new business, really, agriculture, and so on. So really, and the E component helps us to cut through a number of the challenges that we ordinarily would have, especially in market, in customer acquisition, and so on. In terms of so in the enabling space, you're talking about access to broadband, if you will, but also you're now looking at the ICT infrastructure and making it available, which is becoming available. But then if you move to the product side and you say, where are the opportunities? Just think about it. And outsourcing is everybody works at home now. So it's the outsourcing model is now the new normal. That is, although when you now start putting in the intellectual property like other person asked, then there may be some restrictions, but the outsourcing is a new normal. Beyond outsourcing, the fintech industry is doing a lot. The software development segment is doing a lot, and there's still a lot more to be done. So it just name it. The opportunities are enormous, really. I can't list all of them, but so e-agriculture, e-agriculture is quite, if you think about it, it sounds abstract, but if you put it in the context of improving yield, so understanding the temperatures, the optimal temperatures, the optimal conditions under which a product will grow, then it starts making sense. Then you start thinking about this, the hardware,
Okay, I think Francis is frozen. I hope it will be just for a few minutes. So do bear with us when this world of broadband and bandwidth and internet connections. So thank you for bearing with us. Just to mention that we will be rounding up soon. I think we're just going into our last set of questions once we're reconnected with Francis. So if there are any further questions, now is the time. Thank you.
Sorry, I lost power, so.
Yeah. I guess the reality of things we have to deal with to be competitive is evident.
And again, in fact, talking about power and talking about the SMEs, and the question that we are thinking through is how do we leverage renewables for SMEs? Because some SMEs don't need 2 megawatts of power. They don't even need more than 10 kilowatts or 20 kilowatts. So how do you leverage renewables? You think about that as you're thinking about even providing common facilities and so on. So there are a lot of innovative things that people can do and people are already doing to improve their competitiveness, to be able to trade. Hopefully you heard all I said about e-agriculture.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And now just if you could say a few words about manufacturing, particularly lingerie manufacturing, also just that manufacturing, clothing, and personal products, as well as if you could talk about issues of double taxation and multiple taxation, because those are issues that actually impede our competitiveness.
Okay, so the line was a bit stable, but I heard garments, a few words about garments and double taxation. Did I miss anything else?
That was it. Just issue of double taxation, and then manufacturing, garment, personal wear industry.
Okay, so let's talk about garments. So really, normally when you talk about garments, you talk about cotton, textiles, and garments, right? Now, what is clear is that African and Nigerian garments are in demand in the rest of Africa and across the world. What beats me is why no one, and we produce this thing at a small scale. What beats me is that an aggregator hasn't emerged to pretty much mechanize what we do. Is it in terms of standard measurements, so that if you're a size 16 on this Agbada or whatever, you're a site 16, and then you go. So really,
Yeah.
one is the market is there. People come and buy products in Nigeria, but it's still at a small scale level. Our people now need to reach out and really attack the market really, or explore the market. So that's number one. Number two is that some of the low-hanging fruits are there really, but you just need an aggregator to take it up and run with. And I would have taken it, but I'm doing a National Action Committee.
Maybe post your national service.
Okay, on double taxation, again, this is an issue that that is being worked on at the National Economic Council level. Your double taxation here is in country within Nigeria, right? So this is something that is being worked on. It is a similar issues. People, it will take a while and effort, sustained effort for people to see the bigger picture and work towards the bigger picture. But again, talking about the opportunities for ICT, therein is the opportunity, because where in every state and across states, you're able to pay for your permits, pay for whatever you need to pay for. It is verifiable, and that state now says we received your revenue, and you would have done away with the hassles, but you also would have secured the revenue. That is it on one hand. And where you now have the collaboration among states, and they have access to that same infrastructure, that platform, then the double taxation issues will start coming down. So again, it's
Oh wow. I'm sure he'll be reconnected shortly.
it's been worked on. Hello?
Hello, we're here. Can you hear me?
Of the governors and the vice president, and it will take a while. I know they are working on it, but from our perspective and from what we see, yes, whatever solution that comes out will still need to be enabled by ICT. That's what I see, but it is an issue. On the international side is double taxation treaties that we need to have with the African countries, especially for trade in services. So again, I know this is an ongoing initiative. It's work in progress. Hopefully, I've answered the two questions.
Yes, you have. As we round up with the Q&A session, I just have one. No one has asked this question, but I'm sure there's some interest. Financing, funding of readiness. Is there any fund that is dedicated to helping Nigerian exporters transition into the AfCFTA market? Because there'll be certain things that I'm sure there would be need for some sort of a grant funding for different types of businesses. Is there anything you're aware of so that we can share that information with participants?
Okay, so in terms of an AfCFTA dedicated fund or even an incentive
a readiness fund.
Yeah, we have some ideas, but until it's approved, we can't talk about them. But from CBN, we gathered that CBN has about 34 intervention funds targeted at various sectors, at various types of businesses, and so on. Nexim had some export funds. BOI has funds for businesses to scale. So really, for us, based on the conversations we've had over the past 1 year, the quick win for us would be for people to have access to these existing intervention funds. Make sure that it gets to the right people. Make sure that it gets drawn down. Make sure that it is working. So for us, that is what we have identified as short-term action in our plan. Now, the specific readiness funds, if you will, or intervention funds are things that are work in progress. And once we understand what they are and we get approval, we can make them known. Okay. But in fact, it wouldn't be us if CBN if there's an agreement for a new intervention fund by CBN will take it on and launch, and vice versa.
Okay, thank you very much, Francis. This has been a fantastic session. I'm sure all the participants really have appreciated the time you have given to the conversation with us, and the great gift of your presentation that will be shared with all of the participants. There's a lot of information in there. And for board members, I think you've really pointed out the types of questions that board members need to be asking in board meetings, the assessments of the state of play for their company, as well as the opportunities that the company has, as well as the threats, because we are also a market. Just as we're having this discussion, the same discussion is ongoing in other countries. And just as we're preparing, the other countries are preparing, the businesses in other countries are preparing to have access to our market. But thank you very, very much. I'd like to hand over to my colleague who is going to be making the closing remarks. I don't know if you have a few words you want to say before we hand over to Yomi, who is going to make the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the last word that the last few words would be that one way to look at this is getting into the export market, which is great. But the second way, and even more urgent way to look at this, is protecting our local market.
Absolutely.
So every business will need to look at AfCFTA from the perspective of how do I protect my market share? How do I grow my local market share? Because that local market share will give you the skill that you need to be able to attack the foreign market. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much for having me. It's been interesting, and I hope you've all enjoyed this session.
Thank you very much. Abayomi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abayomi Olarimoye. I am a member of the WimBoard Institute Committee of WIMBIZ. And I'd like to start by saying a very big thank you to Francis Anatogu for his time, for his efforts, because he's taken time not to speak to us, to explain to us, but he took time to prepare his slides. to understand what we needed to hear from the WimBoard, WIMBIZ, from the women in business perspective, and for breaking this down, making this so practical for us. Like Cecilia said, this whole AfCFTA thing has been like a black box for many people. They know there are opportunities there, but they just couldn't figure out how to go about even getting enough information to navigate. And this has been very helpful. So thank you very much for your time, Francis. We do appreciate you. And for everyone who also was part of this, Cecilia, thank you for your very beautiful moderation of this session. Thank you for the committee members, for the WimBoard Institute, for the WIMBIZ Secretariat who put this together. Thank you very much. And for everyone who attended, I mean, you took like 2 hours of the schedule to listen to this. It is important, but also, yeah, you committed your time to this, and you should be commended for that. So hopefully this would all move us all forward. So we do appreciate your attendance. So thank you very much for attending. I'd just like to add that you will be receiving a link so that you can share your feedback with us. So an evaluation is sent to you in a follow-up mail. Please try to fill it. We would like to hear your opinion about this training. This training is on the series of training sessions we have planned for this year, 2021. We've had one earlier, and this is the second one. And we have another one coming up. And the next one will be finance for non-financial directors. So for directors who are not finance inclined, we'll be having the finance for non-financial directors. And that will take place in June 17th, I think, on Thursday, June 17th. And our facilitator will be Mr. Tunde Lemo, who is a former deputy governor of CBN and who is the current chairman of Flutterwave. So please register on time so that you can be part of what promises to be another interesting session. So we encourage you to also be part of all of our future trainings. We will be releasing a schedule of programs again on the social media platforms. So please try and join. In addition to the WimBoard Institute programs, we also have the general WIMBIZ programs. We have the EU Roundtable coming up virtually on the 3rd of June, 2021. Please try and register to be a part of that. It's a good opportunity to network with like-minded individuals or people who do the same things that you do. We found it very invaluable. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, for joining this session. I would like to wish you a good evening, and I hope to see you again in June when we have the next